We went to Petropavlovsk. It was the closest train station, 120 miles away. It took us about 5, maybe 7 days.
Did you travel by foot?
A little by foot, a little by train, but mostly by foot. Mostly by foot. We were a group of young people, mostly my age, around 14, 15, maybe a little bit older. There were girls too. We traveled to Petropavlovsk. We knew that the army was forming in Totsk and Bozoyuk, so that's where we were trying to get to. It was the period of the most intense fighting between the Russians and the Germans, when the German army was close to Moscow. Gigantic army transports were moving toward the front non-stop. All of Russia, the entire country, all of our industries were focused on supporting the Russian army. So we were waiting at the train stations, sometimes a day or two, sometimes a few days. We slept on the station floors. Sometimes we got a piece of bread or hot water to drink. I think maybe after some 2 weeks of traveling like this, we got to Chelyabinsk, a city in the south, on this side. We learned there that in this part of Russia, the Polish army was almost done recruiting and was moving to the south. Immediately, they separated out the girls and the women, who weren't allowed to travel any further south. We, the boys and the men, continued to Totsk in the dead of the night, in terrible cold and snow. It was December. Not far away from the army camp, there were a few tents on the ice, in the snow. And they put about 50 people in each, without heat or anything to keep them warm. I couldn't take the cold inside like that for long, so I went outside and I ran around the tents all night long, in order not to freeze to death. In the morning, we went to the rallying point at the army camp. There the tents were dug into the ground, and they had a little bit of straw on the ground, and a little heater or a bonfire inside, in the middle. Our situation seemed hopeless, because the army had already stopped recruiting. Yes. So eventually, after 3 days, we asked what we were supposed to do. At first, we were surprised, because we had expected that they were going to save us and let us stay with the army. But then they said, "Go back where you came from." There was no other solution. I was without money, without a ticket, without documents, and traveling with one other guy a little bit older than me. We were from the same village in Siberia. We had to go back to Siberia, to the village where I had left my mother. It was thousands of miles away. And again, without any money, without a ticket, without anything to eat. And we were going back. First 1,000 miles or more by train, and then more than 120 from the train station to the village by foot. It was, when I think about it today, it was impossible for anyone to make that journey. But somehow, we made it. How, I don't know. Maybe it was just luck. We had so much life experience already that we could manage it. Also, at 14, I was in good physical condition, which was very helpful. The worst part was having to travel the 120 miles in December by foot, from the train station to the village. We walked for 7 days, and always, very unfortunate. There is a Polish proverb, "The wind always blows in the eyes of the poor." On those plains, the wind was terrible, and it really was always blowing into our eyes. Not only that, but it was also piercing cold. We didn't have proper clothes. We only had our old clothes, which weren't meant for such a heavy winter. So the wind blowing against us felt like 1,000 needles piercing us. Along the way, we asked if we could stay for a night or two in various small villages. In the first village, one person allowed us to stay, but after 30 minutes, the NKVD, the political police, came. They said that we were spies. We didn't have proper documents to explain why we were here, but we talked to them and explained for ourselves how and why we were traveling, and eventually, somehow, they believed us. They didn't arrest us, and they let us go free. We walked 120 miles. One day we got caught in a snowstorm. A snowstorm on the plains is a death sentence, because you can easily get disoriented, and wander around in circles, and get really tired and want to sit down. If you sat down, you would freeze to death in a minute, or wolves would attack. Once we heard wolves howling nearby. Luckily, what saved us was that we heard dogs barking, and we followed the sound. There was another small village on the plains. That saved us. Eventually, I came back home to my mother. She didn't recognize me. After all those days, I was dirty, lice-ridden. I remember in those camps in Totsk, I had come from my home, so I was clean, but there were people from the gulags and from the jails, from all over. So lying on the straw, I could feel when lice went behind my collar. It was terrible. But my mother knew what to do. I had to quickly take off all my clothes. She took them and put them into the fire. It took me a month to get better. And I decided to go and look for the Polish army again. This time my mother gave me a bag of dried bread to take with me, just in case. Also, I knew that the army was in the south. So instead of traveling back to the west, I went to Novosibirsk and then further south. There was a Polish delegation in Novosibirsk, but all there was no help to be had there. No help at all. The only thing I could get was a little bit of information as to where, in which direction I should go. I got to a place called WWII. I don't remember exactly in what region it was. It was somewhere in the south, maybe in Kyrgyzia. There was a rallying point in WWII, where the 10th Division had formed. I was 16 years old then. So I went to see the Army Commission. They examined me, and I was accepted into the Polish Army. I was accepted. It was such a happy moment for me. What would I have done otherwise? Later, some of the youngest boys were accepted to a special section for young cadets called Junaki. I was accepted and immediately received a British uniform. The tents here were also dug into the ground, but the climate was better. The sun shined during the day, muddy, melted snow and slush, frost during the night. A lot of people died there. They got to WWII so exhausted, so maltreated, that every day and every night, many bodies were carried out of the tents. They carried the dead people out. It was... In the army, they taught us a little bit of a drill. And when I think about it today, it wasn't useful. Everyone was so exhausted. I was young and in better physical condition. So I coped better than those who had come from the concentration camps or from the jails. They were so weak. And this kind of army drill, in this kind of weather, marching in deep mud, the mud splashing around, and the commands, get down, crawl in the mud, and in a moment, get back to the tents. You had 10 minutes to get back in line in clean uniforms. It wasn't wise. Luckily, it was only for a very short time. I was only in this southern Russian camp for 4 weeks. One thing that often happened there was that when the sun was high, they led us up a hill. Everybody had to take off his shirt, and we had to work on killing the lice. It was called Wojeboyka. I even have a picture. It was a typical activity there. After 4 weeks, they evacuated us to Krasnovodsk and then further to Iran.